Hello. So I've tried to do this a couple times. We'll see if this one I managed to get it in to a small, to a nice, tight little discussion. This will not be a deep dive. I'll touch on some subjects pretty lightly, because otherwise I will tangent off and it will take forever. So, we're talking about Yuan-Ti. I'm going to start with a little bit of discussion of what Yanti are, the history of their history in the game system, and then I'm going to go into some of the reasons why I like Yanti, especially recently. So first, I'm going to just go into the character creation thing, just so I can pull up the Yanti. What are Yanti? Yanti are a long-time monster in Dungeons and Dragons that are a group of snake people. Um, they are divided into three various types. There are the purebloods. There are the Malicens, is what they are called now, though they used to be called half-bloods. And there are the Abominations. The purebloods are have the least status in Yuan-Ti society because their blood is more purely human, and the Yuan-Ti are trying to abandon their humanity, or have successfully abandoned their humanity. And the closer you are to human, the less worthy you are. So the Yuan-Ti purebloods is one thing. The next level up are the Malicens, or the half-bloods, which are substantially more snake-like. And the next level up is the Abominations, who are typically almost completely snake with maybe some arms and a humanoid torso. Sometimes they have a human head, sometimes they don't even have any arms and they'll be mistaken for a Naga. But there are other things, like there are the Anathema, but those are the three mainstays of the species. The purebloods, the Malicens, and the Abominations. They are a remnant of an ancient human society that revered serpents and made deals with dark powers to blend their form with that of the snakes they so admired. In so doing, they abandoned their human morality, though I think they abandoned that long before that transformation. Um, and they are a imperialist and colonialist society, which is somewhat ironic if you think about it in several ways. And they are cannibals. Their rituals involve eating other human beings, or even eating other Yuan-Ti. That is the default culture, but all that is culture. You can read a little bit here. Their evilness, cunning, and ruthlessness are legendary. Yuan-Ti constantly scheme to advance their own dark agendas. They are calculating and suave enough to form alliances with other evil creatures when necessary, but they always put their own interest first. So that is what the Yuan-Ti are, in a nutshell. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Yanti, and I'm going to keep you to the far side there, because I'm going to probably put images over here to the left. Unfortunately, I can't have her emote or do any gestures or anything. Not that this game's the best for that anyway. But anyway. So, Yanti were created by David Cook in his module Dwellers of the Forbidden City, which he created partially as... He created a central encounter with Yanti on a throne of bone and skulls. And then he, as part of his application to join TSR, and then he expanded that into a full module and a full city, which that module, Dwellers of the Forbidden City, was used in tournament settings in conventions for several years. I don't know if it actually was for several years. It was for at least a brief period of time. But that was in 1981 when the Yanti were created. I would have been about 4 years old. After that, they were published in Monster Manual 2, or the first edition game, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. That would have been in 1983, and ever since then, they have been a mainstay of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, they have appeared in the initial Monster Manual of every edition since the period in Monster Manual 2 of first edition. In first and second edition, the majority of the lore was rather limited. There was an article in Dragon Magazine issue number 151 that was called The Ecology of the Yuan-Ti, that went in with a lot of the ecology. There was a whole series of ecology articles that got into the life cycles of different monsters. It always felt kind of weird for them to do it on sentient beings with cultures and everything, but oh well. In any case, that article introduced some concepts which were later kept on, but by and large, most of that article was ignored, thankfully. It involved some really grotesque reproductive practices, basically. And if you're interested, you can go read it. Trigger warning. Forced transformations, dehumanization, lots of nasty stuff in that. In any case, that was first edition. In second edition, the lore didn't expand that much. Some references to the Histachi that were from that Dragon Magazine issue number 151 by David Wellington appeared here and there. But the lore was pretty generic. This what I just gave you: ancient human empire that wanted to become snake-like, imperialists, colonialists, slave takers, evil, cunning, demon worshippers, that kind of thing. Third edition expanded that a little bit more, with third edition's in very heavy emphasis on the Forgotten Realms. There was a supplement, actually, a full supplement called the Serpent Kingdoms, which got into all the scaled races, including like the lizard folk, the Nagas, and a couple of other things. I think kobolds were sort of included, but they're more the nature of dragons, and dragons were a separate thing. Any case, in that third edition supplement, Serpent Kingdoms, by Ed Greenwood, and let me double check what my people's names were. And yes, the music did just go silent because I tabbed out. There you are. Where is it? There it is. So the Serpent Kingdoms is by Ed Greenwood, Eric L. Boyd, and Darren Drader. And it will be up here. That one got into the existence of a sort of a progenitor species called the Saruk. And the Saruk were like, we're going to alter all these different races to produce our ideal minions, and we're the greatest people in the world, and yada yada yada. And the Yanti inherited their perspective on other beings from the Saruk in that line. The names Mearshulk and Seth, I am not sure whether they started in second edition, but I think they actually started in third edition. As that Dragon article mentioned a demon name of who created the Yanti, but that particular name has never been used ever again. It's one of the things that was buried from that article. The Saruk thing, as far as I know, has been ignored for the most part in 4th and 5th edition. But it might be a truth of Forgotten Realms, but not other settings. Um, we haven't had any sign of the Saruk being mentioned in 5th edition. In any case, they introduced the idea of Mir Shulk as the name of the empire that the Saruk had, one of the empires the Saruk had, and Seth as the name of the demon god that snake god that they served. This was shifted a little bit recently in 5th edition, where they say Mir Shulk was the demon, the original demon that created the Yanti, followed by Mir Shulk going into torpor, and the Yanti civilization starting to crumble. And it is in the lore that they're not certain which caused which, whether the Yanti empire crumbling caused Mir Shulk to go into slumber, or Mir Shulk going into slumber caused the Yanti empire to crumble. When they're not sure which way it happened. After Mir Shulk went into torpor, Seth stepped in and said, "Hey, you don't have a patron anymore. I'll step in." Other things that the 5th edition has done has introduced the idea that there are dozens of snake gods, and they are constantly being rotated out as Yanti elevates themselves to the position of snake god and devouring their predecessors. There are certain overly powerful ones like Mir Shulk and Seth and Dindar that remain in their position and have never been challenged. Dindar is more of a great old one that gets mentioned as one of the elder evil things from 2nd edition, because it gets mentioned in some of the stories about the gods like Cyric and Mask and all that. It doesn't have much active role in the setting, and it feels more like some Yuan-Ti were looking for a patron and stumbled on this Dindar's existence and started worshipping it, and it probably, like a good Lovecraft, a Cthulhian entity, doesn't really realize that or care about the Yuan-Ti's attention. Toward the end of 3rd edition and throughout most of 4th edition, there was another god, Zahir. And we have barely started this, so I have no care about it. And that's where you have, I know it's 3rd edition because it's here in Neverwinter Nights 2, 3.5. And Zahir was a god of poison, assassins, deception. And that is... that became the primary snake god through 4th edition. 4th edition also had a brief period where they decided the Yuan-Ti were never human. They were a prehistoric snake people thing. They kept the idea of the purebloods as human cultists that were worshipping the Yuan-Ti and went through some ritual to become kind of Yuan-Ti-like. But they weren't actually Yuan-Ti. They were called snake tongue cultists instead of purebloods. 4th edition is also where they dropped the term half-blood and started calling the middle step as Malicents. 5th edition went back to having purebloods, kept the word Malicent, and Abomination has been staying the same ever since. Now, there are some definite problems with the Yuan-Ti in the sense of what kind of some of the ways they are implied to be. David Cook was aiming for a idea of like the Conan novels, so he drew on the serpent people from Conan, the Conan novels and Robert Howard's novels, which were later adapted into the Cthulhu mythos by Lynn Carter and Clark Ashton Smith. So they're their followers of the great old one Yig. And it comes with a lot of Robert Howard's there is a lot. Robert Howard and Lovecraft were both fairly racist. Let's put it that way. And even if David Cook was just aiming at the adventure of that thing and not deliberately thinking about the racist undertones of like the what he was doing, it worked its way in. The Yanti have a Asiatic style name. It's actually a syllable soup as far as I know. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just made up. I imagine that they wanted something foreign and exotic sounding that players wouldn't immediately recognize as like they would a vampire or a dragon or something like that. So they just made something that sounded vaguely foreign and they latched onto the Asian sounding language. They are often associated with jungles, so um, they end up getting dressed up in appearances that vaguely resemble Southeast Asia. Like the third edition one has a dress that I might be wrong and I might be misremembering it, but looks a little bit like a sleeveless Audai. Um, a lot of the architecture, they describe the architecture as involving a lot of ramps and poles and circles, um, which makes me kind of want to have a Yanti lecture somebody about accessibilities of dungeons, to be honest, because at least that's one thing they do that isn't horrible. Um, but when you see art, it looks very stone pyramid. It looks very Yucatan or Amazon, uh, and I'm not familiar enough with the cultural situations there to point out all the places where the Yanti are a little bit have some issues that need to be looked at. Um, but they are there. That said, we have also um, had some other bits in the Yanti history. And in third edition, Eberron came out, and Eberron had a creature called the group of creatures called the Shulasakar, which are kind of like Yanti if Yanti were inspired by Coatls instead of stereotypical snake is evil type look. And they're still kind of jerks, but they're not out to kill people and they're not out to rule people. They're just kind of full of themselves. So they're, by the alignment system of third edition in D&D, good aligned jerks. But that's one example of a group of good Yanti that existed. In fourth edition, there was a novel by Tim Pratt, I believe. Yep, Tim Pratt, called Venom in Her Veins, which featured as a main character a Yanti pureblood ranger who, at the start of the story, does not know she is a pureblood Yanti. She was a foundling and was raised by humans. And from what I can tell from the summary, she's a pretty decent person, but I haven't read the novel. It came out after I had stopped regularly buying WotC books, or TSR books rather. So I'll have to maybe take a look at it and see if it's worth anything. More recently, the Candlekeep Adventures had one scenario where you go to help some grungs with a Yanti invasion, and the Yanti were there to kill some other Yanti and obliterate evidence at a temple that was found there, because the temple gave evidence that the Yanti actually originate from prior to Mir Shulk, and makes the story told by the Serpent Kingdoms a lie. So that's another case where you can see that where there's a potential for Yuan-Ti that are not necessarily enmeshed in that horrific culture that is described as the default villain culture. Now, as to why I am interested in Yuan-Ti, for one thing, they're snake people. At some point, partially leaning because I was born Year of the Snake, and it doesn't take much for me to go from, oh, this is mildly interesting fact, to, yes, this is a defining bit of interest in my life if I don't keep a close eye on it. But this is why I like Gorgons. This is why I like snake-like characters in general. So the aesthetic of Yuan-Ti as snake people is pretty cool. I prefer the purebloods just because I like to have the human face and the human torso type thing. But I guess that means some Malison I'm fine with. Other than that, I get a little bit uncanny valley. And now there's another thing I do is I am very much about evil has to be a choice. So when I see things that are always chaotic evil, I tend to like to play good versions of them. With Yuan-Ti, some of them are born. For those that choose to become Yuan-Ti, and the ritual to become Yuan-Ti is a cannibalistic ritual. Person who wants to be transformed has to butcher and devour loads of people in a horrific ceremony that opens them up, that where they are deliberately casting off their morality, their ties, and all that. The Candlekeep adventure implies that is one way to become Yuan-Ti, but it's not the original way, and maybe the Yanti were created as a species in a different way originally, and this is just sort of a mockery, which, to be honest, is very in character with the Abyss. So the Yanti, by default, the default society of the Yanti very much choose to do evil things. But not every Yuan-Ti is somebody who underwent a transformation. Some of them are born to be what they are, and you are not born evil. That is not a thing that happens. Evil is a choice, it is not a nature. So, when I see this species is born evil, I tend to play good versions of them. I've played good half-orcs, good hobgoblins, good vampires. I have definitely played a fair number of, on video games, good Gorgons. I've not yet quite managed to get a good Gorgon in a TTRPG for an extended period of time yet. Working on it, but not really happened. So, playing a good guy Yuan-Ti, even back when I was reading, and the culture very much was these people chose very aggressively to be evil, terrible ass jerks. And they've definitely fit in with my criteria for what is evil. I still wanted to play like the defector that was not aware of that culture. Like, for instance, say the pureblood that is born to one of the spies, and the spy's not going to tell the pureblood all of what's going on, because then the pureblood will give it away and get them killed by people that are on the lookout for Yuan-Ti. So yeah, I started playing good Yuan-Ti because aesthetic is cool, and I like playing good versions of typically evil characters. But I have made a lot of Yuan-Ti characters recently. I've only ever gotten to play a couple of them. And the reason it went from Yuan-Ti are aesthetically pleasing to, oh my goodness, this is a concept I have to play, is because of stuff written in the Volo's Guide to Monsters. Let me go ahead and, I should have had it over here already, but I didn't. let me go ahead and read one of Elminster's notes. Ye cannot goad one of the serpent folk into hatred or fear, or evoke in it love or friendship. They may feign such things to cozen ye, but within they are always coldly, calmly calculating. And the book goes on a lot more on that whole issue. It does a really icky thing about their emotions are different, therefore that is part of why they are evil. Which, yeah. But the idea of the Yuan-Ti themselves having this altered emotional state is extremely relatable and appealing, as far as I go. So, despite that line there about they don't know fear or hatred or all of that, Yanti are not immune to the conditions of charmed and frightened. They are capable of being frightened. They are capable of being charmed. So, in my regard, I mean, you could certainly see that as being an analog situation, and that's what I do. Is I don't see them as having, by the lore, I don't see them as having like anger as we know anger to be, or grief as we know grief to be, or anything like that lines. I tend to use a mathematical metaphor to describe the way I approach Yanti emotional states. Not that all of them are mathematical experts or anything, but it is, to me, discussing things in terms of a calculation, like from that quote from the Elminster quote, talking about things in terms of calculation and mathematics gets closest to that attitude that we as that most humans would equate to being dispassionate or unemotional that I'm trying to evoke. And what I'm trying to point out is that it's not that their emotions are non-existent, it's that their emotions are not human. And would come across as being very dry and dispassionate and disconnected from empathy to people that aren't them. Especially considering that most of the individuals of the species are from a culture that is aggressively hostile and domineering. For that matter, before I get on a little bit of that, it is interesting to me, and I don't think this was done on purpose. I think this was the writers wanting to give detail to an evil cult and using the evil that they understood, and using one of the evils that is most common in our daily life as Americans, to model how they built the Yanti cult, the snake god cult. I'm not going to call it the Yanti cult, the snake kingdom cult, because Yanti, unless we start learning they have a specific different name for themselves, and I think there is such a one in the third edition Serpent Kingdoms thing, but that is the Serpent Kingdoms term for themselves. But until we learn that the Yanti have a term for themselves other than that, I'm going to refer to the Serpent Kingdom cult for the from now on for the general evil nastiness thing. But you have a lot of lower level people that are scrambling to get very rarely offered promotions to be transformed to a higher state, from a human cultist to a pureblood, from a pureblood to a Malicent, from a Malicent to an abomination, from an abomination to an anathema, from an anathema to being a dang snake god. All of these transformations require the death of each of these transformations require the death of dozens of slaves, preferably human. Apparently, has to be human. And they will present a united front to outsiders, external threats, but within they're always seeking out a way to eliminate their rivals or open up a path for themselves to be promoted to the next level. It's very cutthroat, very snake eat snake, literally, in many cases. And with the added issue of the Candlekeep, we have a situation with a horrific cult, abusive, domineering, all-consuming cult that has been systematically erasing the culture of the people that created it. And then, I mean, we're still talking about Amazon, but we're not talking about a rainforest or a river anymore. And I'm just of the opinion that when the writers in 5th edition sat down to create an evil cult, they just looked at real life and thought of, not deliberately, they just thought about what was evil, and they produced a corporate culture. In any case, moving on. So, how I present, let's go back to the math metaphor for how I present Yuan-Ti expressions and Yuan-Ti emotions. And that is, okay, in the case of anger, you have all these calculations that you were doing, delicate things, and you found somebody came in and changed all your numbers and made those calculations you had false as a result. That is kind of the idea I have for how they would express anger. Fear is a matter of, and these are emotions I haven't as much delved into as I have with some of the later ones. Fear is a matter of, they sit down and start doing the calculations, and every calculation they do is coming across against them. Like, you sit down to do your taxes and you keep coming up that you owe $5,000. And how the hell are you going to pay that? That is the kind of thing. Now, I don't think they are consciously doing calculations. I'm thinking that at that deep emotion, that deep primal level that we have, what we consider our emotions, that if a human were to look into the mind of a Yuan-Ti at that deep primal level, they would mistake it for those dispassionate calculations of matching of values. And it's not so much that the Yuan-Ti lack emotion, they lack human emotion. It's not so much that the human lacks logic, it's just that human context for reality versus Yuan-Ti context for reality is completely different. And then the Yuan-Ti context for reality is further poisoned by the Serpent God cult. Which has not done the species any favors. They have collapsed far more than they have expanded. But anyway, moving on with the ways I address. One of the other ones is I look at love and hate. And I have long thought that love and hate are things that are maybe have an emotional content but aren't emotions in and of themselves. And I sat down and thought at one point at how a Yuan-Ti, the equivalent expression for Yanti what it would be and how they would describe it to a human. And it is, for love, is this thing or person or whatever that they love, by its simple existence, makes the world a better place. And hate is the opposite. This thing, the removal of this thing would make the world a better place. And then I went in to grief, because at the time I was imagining the idea of a typical edgy backstory of a Yanti who lost a friend or loved one recently, and how I imagined they would describe grief to a person. And it was, for this matter, imagine this is somebody who is hefty and understanding of calculation and math and stuff like that. And they would say, and what I came down to them saying was, imagine there is an element you include in every calculation you make in your life. This element is pervasive, so much so that you're not even aware that you're including it. It is just something you do on an automatic basis without even stopping to consider it. As complete, as innate as assuming a starting point of 0. Now, imagine some point you wake up, or imagine at some point you're walking, something's going on, and suddenly that element is just gone. That element that is in everything, that it pervades your life. Imagine that element is just taken away, it is removed, it is destroyed, it is forbidden, it is unreachable by you. And every calculation in your life is now in chaos. That is grief for the Yanti as I see it. And this altered mental state is, I say altered, I shouldn't, because they're not human. It is altered from a human perspective. But this is why I am very into the idea of playing Yuan-Ti recently. They went from being hateful snake people that, hey, I could play a good version, to being hella neurodivergent. So very much relatable to my life. Especially if you take into the idea of the pureblood who grows up not knowing they're pureblood, or even if they know they're pureblood, not really knowing what that means, aside from some distorted rumors that come about because of that snake cult. It's very much like me growing up without a diagnosis, and still not having a diagnosis, not being able to afford a diagnosis, not knowing if I'm simply, Asperger's or autistic, or if I'm ADHD or something else. And having that wonder if, am I a fraud? Am I actually, quote unquote, normal and just think I'm these things? I can definitely relate a lot. There is a thing that happens that I was not consciously aware of until I had a discussion with other neurodivergent people, and they talked about it, where there is a disconnect between the internal emotions and the external expressions, or rather the outlet of internal emotions is different from what it is with most people. I have, since I was in my late teens and early 20s, talked to people about how I have scripts to deal with normal situations, whereas I watched how a situation was handled by somebody else and I mimic that situation. A lot of these scripts are to the point where I do them kind of automatically, but they're not like natural because I can turn them off. If I get tired, if I start running out of spoons, I have talked about disabling scripts. Um, I've said things like, I'm very tired right now and I don't know how many scripts are disabled, so I might be acting a little weird. So the Yuan-Ti, I mean, I could have gotten this a little. I got this a little bit from the Changeling, because the Changeling identity thing of being, some of them being very much into changing identities a lot, was immensely appealing to me as well. But it wasn't as relatable because I am not. That is not my experience. I have doing a lot of role playing and all of that, but it is kind of a playing a role. It's not like having alts. And I'm also, as far as I know, we've discussed this with some of my friends, we're pretty sure that I'm fairly cis male. I don't have really a particular interest in what my body is like, or a particular gender ideal that I think about all the time. I may be a little bit non-binary. I don't know. I know I'm ace, but that's it. But so the changeling thing was interesting, but it wasn't, oh my god, that's me. Reading the bit about the emotions in Volo's Guide to Monsters, even where it was caked under that layers of their lack of emotions is why they're evil, even caked underneath that, that was me. I mean, I very clearly have emotions, and they are not like, they are human emotions. They are probably triggered in different ways than most people expect, and they express in different ways. I'm having a little bit right now where I'm talking fast. I'm doing a little bit of hand gestures by the fact not having a camera on me. My voice is becoming a little bit stilted, as you just saw. It is very, though some of those things are really normal human things, but they're a little bit. There's a reason why. There a lot of the stuff that is characteristics for when my emotions get displayed are the sort of things that people associate with someone who is on drugs. As adverse, someone who is experiencing a heavy emotion. Whereas things that are mostly connected to being heavily emotional, like tears or laughter or smiling, are things I do for other people's benefits. I'll smile when I think about smiling, to be honest. I do it sometimes because I want to show people that I find their thing amusing, or I want to give people reassurances that I got it. I laugh. Laughing might be a fairly automatic trigger because I do laugh pretty on the drop. On the other hand, I have a lot of cases where laughter is very delayed. So it is a little bit difficult. If you completely surprise me and give me a situation where I don't have a past experience with, I generally present blank. As in, I don't have a good idea on how to express the emotions in this situation, so I just go blank. And it's just, this is why I want to play Yuan-Ti a bit more, and I'm getting to play one. The Yuan-Ti I'm playing is a mess with confidence issues. She's a barbarian. We're playing her off as a Malison, and that her barbarian abilities, form of the beast, the shape-shifting you get with Form of the Beast is her Malison mutation. And she is a stuttering mess of an archaeologist. Yes, she's a barbarian archaeologist. She is incredibly socially awkward. She, in the terms of the mathematical computations, she is constantly checking and rechecking herself. She has no confidence in her own competency. And she's constantly, she would probably come across as very frightful and nervous, and which is really kind of a dangerous way to do it because she is a barbarian. She is definitely a very powerful, physically powerful entity that is not afraid of conflict. But she has no social confidence whatsoever. She's not afraid of physical conflict, let's put it that way. And I once again have failed to keep this under 30 minutes. I am going to go ahead and stick with this version, though, because I've tried to redo this several times. And every time I get to the point where I start talking about... I got through the history in this one in about 20 minutes. 15-20 minutes, and I started getting into some of the other stuff. But once I start... But this is just one of those things where I talk a long period of time. So that's that, and I'll start going to try to set this up with images in a little bit. Talk to you later. Bye.